When the waitress finally realized who this homeless man was, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She was in for a surprise. There was that man again by the corner. He was always seated in the same place, no matter what kind of weather, looking sad and alone. Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This was the same man Cindy saw every day as she was on her way to work. Cindy thought he looked alone, but the man didn't seem to mind. In fact, he always seemed to be in a cheerful mood. He smiled and tried to chat with random passers-by. He wasn't even asking for money from them. He just genuinely wanted to talk to them. One day, Cindy decided she couldn't take it anymore. She felt bad for how some people were treating this innocent man as if he were mattered less just because he was homeless. So she decided to do something about it. Cindy worked as a waitress in one of the fanciest restaurants in Canada. The restaurant already had 2 Michelin stars, so food wasn't always cheap. Nonetheless, guests still paid a ton of money to eat there. Sometimes, Cindy would find it hard to look at the irony of it all. Inside the restaurant, you'd see people spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a single meal. Whereas on the corner of the street, you'd see homeless people with barely anything to eat. Cindy didn't particularly like working for that restaurant, but she worked there for the pay. She needed the money to pay for her education because she was taking up culinary studies. It wasn't fair that people were spending hundreds of dollars on this restaurant, and right outside, there were homeless people who barely had anything to eat. So, she decided to take action. She looked around carefully and nervously walked towards the kitchen. Her boss just so happened to be at work too. She needed to be extra careful if she wanted the plan to be successful. Even the olives in the restaurant cost a lot. So she needed to make sure the things she'd steal wouldn't get noticed. If it did, she could immediately lose her job. She didn't like stealing, but for her, this was a small step in the right direction. Now was the right moment. The chef had just looked away quickly to scream at some kitchen help. She would feel extremely good if she successfully managed to snatch something right under his nose. However, it had to be done at this very moment if she didn't want to get caught and lose her job. While the chef wasn't looking, she quickly opened the fridge and packed more than 20 products. It wasn't that much that they would notice, but it would be more than enough to make a nice and delicious meal for the homeless man. She was going to check if the coast was clear when suddenly, there was this loud banging coming from the refrigerator door. It was the chef. Cindy suddenly felt her heart pounding and her hands go cold. The chef had noticed that someone went into the cooler room and failed to close the door. This didn't normally happen because of one specific reason. Only the chef was allowed to enter the room unsupervised. Cindy began panicking. She had to get out of the room ASAP. But the only possible way out was right where the chef was standing. She realized this was probably going to be the end of her job and her source of income. Now that there was nowhere to go, she lost all hope. Tears began streaming down her cheeks softly. She loved cooking, but now she had to give up her job. In turn, she also needed to give up her studies because she wouldn't have a source of income anymore. She slowly walked towards the back of the cooler room, holding the big bag full of the stolen food. She sat down and leaned against the back wall. But then, something surprising happened. As fate would have it, this wasn't the end. As it turns out, the wall that Cindy had been leaning on turned brittle over the years. It just so happened, too, that the part she leaned against was the weakest part of the wall. As she fell back, she landed in the alley behind the restaurant with a hard fall. She was sure it was going to leave a bruise the next morning, but what was more important was that she'd now be able to make her escape with the ingredients she took. She steadied the tray in front of the hole in the wall and ran all the way back home. The escape happened to be perfectly timed too, because not more than 5 seconds later, the chef bust the door open, expecting to catch someone red-handed. Luckily, Cindy had already escaped by then, so all he was faced with was an empty cooler room. Finally, Cindy got home safe and unscathed. Placing the ingredients on the kitchen counter, she got to work. She spent more than 2 hours cooking in her kitchen that day. She hoped the homeless man would enjoy this meal. Finally, she gave the food to the man. She also gave him some change in case he needed to make a purchase. His eyes grew so wide. This was the first time he experienced kindness like this, he told her. Since that day, she walked to work in a cheery mood. There was no way her boss would dampen her mood for the many days to come. For more than a week, she kept on offering the man some homemade meals that were absolutely delicious and well-made. Then one day, the chef appeared on her doorstep. It turns out that the chef had discovered the tray she left behind. Plus, he had looked at camera footage and found out what Cindy had done. "You're fired," he screamed at her. Then he went on a 15-minute sermon about how he was boss and why he should be obeyed. Cindy didn't catch what he said entirely, though, because she stopped listening. Cindy didn't pay attention to what her boss was saying because she was too busy thinking of other things. She saw her future start to drift away from her. Without a job, how could she put herself through culinary school? If she didn't have the funds to pay for school, that meant she could kiss her culinary career goodbye. She wasn't even sure she would have a career in culinary at all because a recommendation from her boss was also out of the question. The day after, Cindy passed by the restaurant. She peeked through the glass window, and a tear ran down her cheek. She was about to continue with her day when she spotted the homeless man sitting in his usual spot once more. He asked her why she looked sad, and she explained the situation to him. How terrible. They can't just fire a culinary talent such as yourself, can they? This is a loss for the entire culinary world. I don't agree, and I'm going to do something about it right away. Angrily, the man stood up, brushed off his clothes, and marched into the busy restaurant. The horrible chef spotted them and stormed towards them. He tried to kick both of them out of the establishment. "Get out of here, you dirty old man. We don't want your kind in here," he told them haughtily. The moment the chef let those words spill out, no one would have expected the surprising turn of events that were about to unfold. The homeless man put his bag down on the ground and started chuckling softly. He looked at the horrible chef right in the eyes and said, "You don't know who I am anymore, do you?" Then he began unbuttoning his coat and removing his cap. Slowly, he began looking less homeless and more like a regular man. Cindy was surprised to see that underneath the dirty coat, the man was wearing a clean and crisp suit. "What's going on?" "I work as a restaurant inspector and judge restaurants on the quality of their menu and service. Now, I was here a few weeks ago, and I've given this restaurant a serious fail. The service was great, but the food was severely substandard. And it was this tyrant's fault, so I decided to do something," he went on. "Last week, I took over most of the shares, which makes me the owner of this business. I first wanted to watch from a distance how the business was run, and that has now become abundantly clear." Then, he turned to the chef and said, "Your food is barely edible, so you're fired." The old man turned to Cindy and told her, "Cindy, the food you gave me last week was innovative, tasty, and the best I've eaten in years. Seeing as the chef's position has just opened up, might you be interested in the job?" Cindy stared at the man with wide eyes. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was this a dream? Is everything that's happening right now real? Immediately, she responded to the old man with a delighted yes. Cindy is currently running the restaurant and is loving every minute of her job. You see, that's why it's very important to always be kind. You never know who you're going to come across on a random day.